Hello there, my name is Michael. What started out as an ordinary day turned into a shocking nightmare come to life. Join me as I tell you about mine and my friend's experience from when the world we know turned upside down. The school library was buzzing. Not with the usual hushed whispers and rustling pages. This was different. Excitement hung in the air, thick and sweet like the smell of Mrs. Peterson's freshly baked cookies. Graduation was just around the corner. The air crackled with anticipation. We were finally breaking free. I sat at our usual table, a scratched-up oak thing tucked in the back corner. My heart thumped a wild rhythm against my ribs. My girlfriend Ashley sat beside me, her hand intertwined with mine. Her eyes sparkled with a mix of nerves and excitement. Graduation was a big deal. It marked the start of our next chapter. Across from us sat our friends, caught in a whirlwind of laughter and excited chatter. CJ, the tallest of our group, gestured wildly as he spoke, his booming laugh echoing through the library. Laura, his girlfriend, tried to get a word in, her eyes twinkling with amusement. They were two peas in a pod, those two, always finishing each other's sentences. We were all on the cusp of something big. We could feel it in our bones. The future stretched out before us, a blank canvas just waiting for us to paint our dreams. We were young, full of hope, and ready to take on the world. Little did we know the world had other plans for us.
I still can't believe we both got into Northwestern.
She exclaimed, her voice filled with awe. She squeezed my hand, her excitement contagious.
It's like a dream come true.
I grinned back, my heart swelling with pride. I know, right? All those late-night study sessions, all that hard work, it all paid off. I glanced down at the acceptance letters we'd received just a few weeks ago. They were safely tucked away in my backpack, tangible proof that our dreams were finally within reach. Think about it. We'll be in Chicago, studying what we love, starting our lives together. The possibilities swirled in my mind, each one more exhilarating than the last. I pictured us walking hand in hand through bustling city streets, exploring hidden cafes, and cheering on the Wildcats at football games. Ashley's eyes sparkled with shared dreams.
And who knows? Maybe one day we'll even see our names up in lights on Broadway.
She laughed, a light, airy sound that sent shivers down my spine. Ashley was born to be a star, her talent shining brighter than any spotlight.
Speaking of dreams,
CJ slammed his hands down on the table, drawing our attention.
Laura and I have some big news too.
Laura, always a little quieter than her boisterous boyfriend, blushed and gave him a playful shove.
Don't get ahead of yourself, CJ.
She chided, but her smile betrayed her excitement.
We're opening a restaurant.
CJ blurted out, unable to contain his enthusiasm any longer. He beamed at us, his eyes shining with pride.
We've already found the perfect location downtown. It's small, but it's got potential.
Laura finally took over, her voice filled with quiet determination.
We've been saving up for ages, working all those part-time jobs after school. It's always been our dream to share our love of food with the world.
She glanced at CJ, her eyes filled with love and admiration.
Well, then make sure you guys have something good for me when I get back from Notre Dame, because I'll be racking up a large appetite from my football games, James said, in a joking manner. Well, I'm off to the land of the rising sun after graduation.
Robbie, ever the adventurer, leaned back in his chair, a mischievous glint in his eye.
Japan? That's amazing, Robbie. What takes you there?
My Uncle Chris and Aunt Yin have a business in Tokyo. They've asked me to come work for them, learn the ropes, maybe even take over someday. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I can't wait to experience a new culture, learn a new language.
Brandon, the quietest member of our group, cleared his throat.
Well, my plans aren't quite as glamorous. My dad's got me lined up for a job at the factory. It's honest work, and it pays the bills.
He admitted, a self-deprecating smile playing on his lips. Section 5, Graduation Anticipation. We continued to chat, our voices intermingling as we shared our hopes, dreams, and anxieties about the future. The library buzzed around us, a symphony of rustling papers, hushed whispers, and the occasional burst of laughter. But in that moment, all that mattered was the six of us, our little circle of friendship, a beacon of warmth and familiarity in the face of the unknown. We were young, invincible, and ready to conquer the world. Graduation was just the beginning. We had our whole lives ahead of us. We could be anything, do anything, achieve anything we set our minds to, or so we thought. The world, as it so often does, had other plans. The laughter died in my throat. The world lurched. It was subtle at first, a barely perceptible shift like a train changing tracks. But then it hit us with full force. The floor seemed to rise up to meet us, the ceiling descending with alarming speed. Books tumbled from shelves, their pages fluttering like panicked birds. Screams erupted from the other tables, a chorus of terror that sent chills down my spine. Instinct took over. I grabbed Ashley's hand, her grip surprisingly strong as we were both thrown sideways. The world spun, a dizzying kaleidoscope of colors and shapes. My stomach churned, threatening to rebel. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, a frantic drum against the chaos.
What's happening?
Ashley screamed, her voice high-pitched and terrified. I could barely hear her over the cacophony of crashing furniture and terrified shouts. The air crackled with a strange energy, an unsettling hum that vibrated through my bones. For a split second there was weightlessness, then with a bone-jarring thud we landed, hard. My head spun. I lay sprawled on a surface that felt strangely familiar yet utterly wrong. It took me a moment to realize I was staring up at what used to be the library floor, now an unfamiliar ceiling above us. Discarded papers and fallen ceiling tiles littered the surface, casting eerie shadows in the dim light.
Michael?
Ashley's voice close to my ear brought me back from the brink of panic. I turned my head, my vision swimming as I tried to focus. Ashley lay beside me, her face pale but thankfully unharmed. Relief washed over me, only to be replaced by a fresh wave of fear as I realized the gravity of the situation. "We're upside down," I croaked, my voice hoarse with shock. The words seemed inadequate, ridiculous even, in the face of the impossible, but there was no denying it. The evidence was all around us, in the topsy-turvy world that had become our new reality. A hand grabbed my arm, hauling me to my feet. It was Brandon, his face etched with concern.
"Are you two all right?"
he asked, his voice tight with worry. He glanced around, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and disbelief.
What the hell just happened?
Ashley's voice trembled as she struggled to her feet, her eyes darting around the disorienting scene. The library was in ruins, books and furniture scattered like a child's discarded toys. The air was thick with dust and a strange metallic scent that made my stomach churn. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice shaky. Fear clawed at my throat, threatening to choke me. I scanned the chaotic scene, my heart pounding against my ribs. Students were scrambling to their feet, some crying, others shouting in confusion. Teachers stumbled around dazedly, their faces etched with a mixture of shock and disbelief.
"We need to find the others,"
Brandon said, his voice firm despite the tremor in his hands. He was right. CJ, Laura, James, and Robbie, where were they? A wave of nausea washed over me as I realized we'd been separated in the chaos.
Over there.
Ashley pointed towards a cluster of overturned bookshelves near the back of the library. I recognized CJ's bright blue jacket sticking out from beneath a pile of fallen books. Relief flooded through me. We weren't alone. We rushed towards our friends, our hearts pounding with a mixture of relief and dread. As we got closer, I heard CJ's voice, frantic and high-pitched.
Help! Someone, please help!
We rounded the corner of the bookshelf and the sight that greeted us stopped me dead in my tracks. Laura was huddled on the ground, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs. CJ was kneeling beside her, his face ashen as he tried to comfort her, and then I saw him. Robbie lay sprawled on the ground, his limbs twisted at an unnatural angle. His eyes were closed, his face pale and drawn, but it was the blood that sent a jolt of pure terror through me. A crimson stain bloomed across his shirt, spreading rapidly across the fabric like a grotesque flower.
Oh my God.
Ashley gasped, her hand flying to her mouth in horror. I could only stare, my mind struggling to process the scene before me. Just moments ago, we'd been laughing, joking, planning our futures. Now, one of us lay dying on the library floor.
"Robbie!"
James's voice, hoarse with panic, broke through the stunned silence. He was on his knees beside Robbie, his hands fumbling with his own shirt. He ripped off a strip of fabric and pressed it against the wound in Robbie's abdomen, his face contorted with effort.
Hold this.
He barked, thrusting the makeshift bandage towards CJ.
Apply pressure. Don't let go.
CJ, his face ashen, took the blood-soaked cloth and pressed it against Robbie's wound. His hands trembled, his eyes wide with fear. "What happened?" I asked, my voice a strangled whisper. The library seemed to tilt on its axis, the world spinning around me.
I don't know. We were thrown against the wall when everything went crazy. I didn't even see it happen.
His eyes were filled with a desperate, helpless fear that mirrored my own.
Don't worry, Robbie. We'll get you help. Everything's going to be okay.
Her words were a desperate plea, a fragile shield against the harsh reality that was unfolding before our eyes. But even as she spoke, I knew the truth. The blood loss was too severe, the wound too deep. Robbie's breathing was shallow, his chest rising and falling in ragged gasps. The light was fading from his eyes, replaced by a dull, vacant stare. James continued to apply pressure to the wound, his face pale and drawn with exertion, but it was a losing battle. The blood continued to flow, staining his hands a sickening crimson.
Hold on, Robbie, just hold on.
But his words were met with silence. Robbie's eyes fluttered open one last time, a flicker of recognition passing through them before they glazed over. His body went limp, his chest stilling. The silence that descended upon us was deafening, broken only by Laura's heartbroken sobs. James sat back on his heels, his shoulders slumping in defeat. He gently closed Robbie's eyes, his own face a mask of grief and disbelief. We watched in stunned silence, the weight of what had just happened settling over us like a shroud. Our friend, our classmate, was gone, and we were trapped in this nightmare, the world outside the library walls a terrifying unknown. The silence in the library was unbearable. The weight of Robbie's death pressed down on us, heavy and suffocating. Laura's sobs echoed through the ruined space, a constant reminder of our loss. I wanted to say something, to offer words of comfort, but my throat felt raw. The words stuck somewhere between my heart and my mind.
We can't stay here.
James said, his voice rough with emotion. He rose to his feet, his movements stiff and mechanical. His eyes, usually filled with laughter and a zest for life, were now dull with grief and a growing sense of horror. He looked at Robbie's body, then back at us, his gaze lingering on Laura for a moment.
He's gone. We can't bring him back.
CJ placed a comforting arm around Laura, his own face streaked with tears. Laura leaned into CJ, her sobs shaking her small frame. The sight of their grief, so raw and palpable, tore at my heart. We had to leave the library. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. This place, once a sanctuary of knowledge and quiet contemplation, now felt cold and menacing, haunted by the ghost of our friend. Stepping out of the library felt like stepping into a war zone. The once familiar hallways were now twisted wreckage, littered with debris and shrouded in an eerie silence. Lockers were ripped from their moorings, their contents spilled out onto the floor like discarded secrets. Flickering emergency lights cast long, grotesque shadows that danced across the walls, amplifying the sense of disorientation and dread. The air was thick with dust and the smell of something acrid, something that made my eyes water and my stomach churn. The silence was broken only by the occasional groan of the building settling around us, each creak and moan sending a fresh wave of fear through my body.
What happened here?
Ashley whispered, her voice trembling. She clutched my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. I could feel her fear, a palpable presence that mirrored my own. I don't know, I admitted, my voice hoarse. The truth was, I didn't even want to think about it. The how and the why didn't matter at that moment. All that mattered was survival. We moved cautiously through the wreckage, our footsteps echoing in the silence. We passed classrooms where desks were overturned, papers scattered and chairs tossed about like they were nothing more than children's toys. The weight of the disaster pressed down on us, a tangible reminder of the fragility of our existence.
Hello? Is anyone there?
CJ called out, his voice echoing through the empty hallway. The silence that followed was deafening, amplifying the sense of isolation that threatened to consume us. It was as if the school itself was holding its breath, waiting for something, anything to break the tension. We rounded a corner and my blood ran cold. A group of students huddled in the middle of the hallway, their faces pale and drawn. They looked up as we approached, their eyes wide with a mixture of hope and despair. One girl, her arm twisted at an unnatural angle, let out a low moan of pain.
Help us, please, someone help us.
A boy pleaded, his voice cracking with desperation. For a moment I felt a flicker of hope. We weren't alone. There were others who had survived the disaster. James asked, stepping forward. He crouched down beside the injured girl, his face etched with concern.
Are you hurt?
We need to find something to splint it.
It's broken.
There's a first aid kit in the nurse's office, but the door is jammed shut.
Brandon said, his voice firm with determination.
We'll get it open.
They moved towards the nurse's office, their shoulders squared with a shared purpose.
We'll get it open.
As James worked on splinting the girl's arm, I found myself bombarded with questions. What had happened to our school, to our town, to the world outside these walls?
I looked at Ashley, her face pale but composed, her eyes reflecting the same questions that haunted my thoughts. We would survive this. We had to.
Do you think it was an earthquake? Or maybe a tornado? I don't know. It didn't feel like any earthquake I've ever experienced. And there wasn't any warning, no sirens, no nothing. It just happened.
Their words sent a shiver down my spine. Whatever had happened, it had been sudden, violent, and completely unexpected. We were trapped. I looked at the faces around me, their expressions a mixture of fear, confusion, and a growing sense of despair. We were all scared, all struggling to comprehend the magnitude of what had just transpired. But we were also survivors. We had faced the unthinkable and emerged, battered but not broken. We would face this new reality together. We had to. The silence after the chaos was deafening. We stood there amidst the debris and the shadows, the weight of what had happened pressing down on us like a physical force. Robbie was gone. Our school, our sanctuary, was a mangled ruin. And the world outside these walls was an unsettling mystery.
I looked at Ashley, her face pale in the flickering light, her hand still clinging tightly to mine. Her eyes, wide with a terror I'd never seen before, met mine. In that shared look, we acknowledged the terrifying new reality we faced. We were trapped, alone.
I wanted to scream, to rage against the unfairness of it all. Robbie, with his infectious laughter and adventurous spirit, was gone, snatched away in a heartbeat. But even in the midst of my grief and fear, a primal instinct kicked in. Survival. We had to survive. For Robbie. For ourselves.
We need to find the others.
James said, his voice hoarse but firm, breaking the heavy silence. He ran a hand through his hair, his usual carefree demeanor replaced by a grim determination. We were stronger together. We moved through the shattered remnants of the school, calling out for survivors, our voices echoing in the eerie silence. Each unanswered call sent a fresh wave of fear through me, a stark reminder of the fragility of life. We found them huddled in classrooms, hallways, and even the gym, their faces etched with fear and uncertainty. Some were injured, their wounds a testament to the violence of whatever had befallen our world. Others were simply in shock, their eyes vacant, their bodies trembling. There was Sarah, the quiet girl from my English class, her eyes wide with terror, clutching a tattered book to her chest as if it were a lifeline. We gathered in the school cafeteria, drawn together by a shared need for safety and comfort. The familiar space, once filled with the sounds of laughter, gossip, and the clatter of trays, now echoed with an unsettling silence. The mood was somber. The enormity of our situation was finally sinking in.
We have some bottled water and non-perishable food from the kitchen. Not much, but it's something. We need to ration it carefully.
James, ever the pragmatic one, took charge. He moved through the crowd, his voice calm but firm as he assessed our situation. He counted heads, making a mental note of the injured, and organizing the meager supplies we managed to scavenge. We were a group of teenagers thrown together by circumstance, united by fear and the desperate hope of survival. I watched James as he moved through the crowd, his shoulders squared with a burden of responsibility I could barely comprehend. He was only 18, just a kid himself, yet he'd stepped up when we needed him most. He hadn't asked for this. None of us had. But in the face of unimaginable chaos, James had become our leader, our anchor in a sea of uncertainty. And as I watched him, a part of me, buried deep beneath the fear and grief, felt a surge of admiration. He was strong. He was capable. He would see us through this. But even as I clung to that hope, a nagging doubt gnawed at the edges of my mind. I closed my eyes, willing myself to breathe, to find some semblance of calm in the midst of the chaos. The day wore on, each passing hour a stark reminder of our predicament. We tended to the injured as best we could, sharing what little food and water we had, and trying to maintain some semblance of order in a world that had been turned upside down. But amidst the fear and despair there were also moments of hope, moments of laughter, of shared stories, of human connection that transcended the darkness that threatened to consume us. We played cards by candlelight, the flickering flames casting dancing shadows on the walls. We sang songs, our voices blending together in a chorus of defiance against the silence that pressed in from all sides. As night fell, casting long, eerie shadows across the cafeteria, a sense of urgency settled over us. We couldn't stay here forever,
We need to find a way out of here.
James said, his voice echoing our collective thoughts.
But where do we go? And how do we even know if it's safe out there?
Her words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of the unknown. We were trapped in a bubble of uncertainty, the world outside these walls as much a mystery as the force that had brought us here. We need to start by figuring out what happened. Maybe there's something, some clue that can tell us what we're dealing with. The night was long and filled with an uneasy silence punctuated by the occasional creak of the buildings settling around us. We huddled together for warmth and comfort, our fears amplified by the darkness and the unknown that lay beyond the fragile walls of our makeshift sanctuary. Sleep, when it finally came, was fitful and filled with unsettling dreams of topsy-turvy worlds and faceless horrors. The line between nightmare and reality blurred, leaving me disoriented and afraid. As the first rays of dawn pierced through the cracks in the boarded-up windows, casting long, eerie shadows across the cafeteria floor, I felt a renewed sense of determination. We had survived the night. We had faced our fears and emerged, battered but not broken. And as I looked around at the faces of my friends, their expressions a mixture of exhaustion and resolve, I knew that we would face whatever the new day brought together. The morning light, filtering through the boarded-up windows, did little to dispel the oppressive atmosphere that had settled over the cafeteria. The air was thick with the smell of stale sweat and fear.
We need to search the school, he said, his voice raspy but resolute. There has to be some explanation, some clue as to what happened.
He looked around at us, his gaze lingering on each face, a silent plea for understanding. We all knew the risks. We'd seen the destruction, felt the terror that clung to every shattered window and overturned desk. But the thought of remaining trapped in the cafeteria, with our dwindling supplies and mounting fears, was even more terrifying. We had to do something. We moved in silence, a small group of survivors navigating through the wreckage of our former lives. The hallways were eerily still. Dust motes danced in the faint light that filtered through the boarded-up windows, casting long, distorted shadows that stretched and twisted with our every move. We moved cautiously, our eyes darting from one shattered doorway to the next, our senses on high alert. The weight of the unknown pressed down on us, heavy and suffocating. The classrooms we passed were frozen in time, textbooks scattered across overturned desks, chairs tossed about like they were nothing more than children's toys. We found no signs of life, no clues as to what had happened, only the unsettling silence and the lingering scent of dust and decay. We reached the auditorium, its double doors hanging precariously from their hinges, a gaping maw that seemed to beckon us closer. The air inside was stale and heavy, thick with the scent of dust and something else, something metallic and vaguely sweet that made my stomach churn.
"Do we go in?" she whispered, her voice barely audible above the pounding of my own heart. She clutched my arm, her fingers digging into my skin, a silent plea for reassurance.
I looked at James, his face grim, his jaw set in determination.
"We have to," he said, his voice low and urgent. "It's the only place we haven't checked."
He pushed open the doors, the sound echoing through the cavernous space like a gunshot. We stepped inside, our eyes struggling to adjust to the dim light that filtered through the grimy windows high above.
The auditorium was in ruins.
Rows of seats were overturned, their plush velvet cushions ripped and torn, exposing the cold, unforgiving metal beneath.
The stage curtains hung in tattered shreds, like the remnants of a nightmare.
And in the center of the stage, illuminated by a single shaft of dusty sunlight, lay a sight that sent a chill down my spine.
It was Mr. Thompson, our principal.
He lay sprawled on his back, his limbs twisted at an unnatural angle, his eyes staring vacantly at the ceiling.
His face, usually so full of life and warmth, was frozen in a mask of terror, his mouth twisted into a silent scream.
A collective gasp escaped our lips as the enormity of the discovery washed over us.
Mr. Thompson was dead.
The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the rasp of our own breathing and the frantic beating of our hearts. We stood there, frozen in place, our eyes glued to the gruesome scene before us, our minds struggling to comprehend the enormity of what we'd found.
"Oh God,"
Laura whispered, her voice trembling with horror. She covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and disbelief. CJ put a comforting arm around her shoulders, his own face pale and drawn.
What happened here?
Brandon asked, his voice barely a whisper. The question hung in the air, unanswered and unanswerable. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine.
"I don't like this place. Can we leave now?"
I wanted to agree with her, to turn and run from the horror that seemed to permeate every inch of the auditorium. But deep down, I knew we couldn't escape our fears. We had to face them, confront the unknown, if we ever hoped to find a way out of this nightmare. James, his face grim but determined, stepped forward. He cautiously approached Mr. Thompson's body, his eyes scanning the surrounding area for any sign of what might have caused his death. The rest of us followed close behind, our fear a tangible presence in the stillness of the auditorium.
There's something in his hand.
CJ said, his voice hushed. He pointed to Mr. Thompson's outstretched hand, his fingers curled tightly around a small, white object. James reached down and gently pried open the dead man's fingers. A crumpled piece of paper fell to the dusty floor, its surface covered in what looked like strange symbols and markings.
"What is that?"
Laura asked, her voice trembling. James picked up the paper and unfolded it carefully. He held it up to the light, his brow furrowed in concentration as he studied the strange markings.
"I don't know, but I think it might be a map."
The crumpled paper felt heavy in James's hand, a tangible weight that extended beyond its physical form. It was more than just a map. It was a symbol of hope, a potential path out of the nightmare we were living. But as I peered at the strange symbols and markings, a knot of unease tightened in my gut.
"What do you think it means?"
Ashley whispered, her voice a mix of apprehension and cautious optimism. James cleared his throat, his voice raspy with tension.
"I don't know, but we have to try. It might be our only chance."
His words, though laced with uncertainty, held a ring of determination that resonated through our small group. We were clinging to hope, however fragile, that this map held the key to our escape. We made a pact in that ruined auditorium, a silent vow sealed by fear and the desperate need to survive. The map, with its cryptic symbols and unsettling aura, became our guide amidst the chaos. We had no way of knowing where it would lead, but remaining trapped in the ruins of our school, our hope dwindling with each passing hour, was unthinkable. As we stepped out of the auditorium, the map clutched tightly in James's hand, the weight of our decision settled upon us. We were leaving behind the familiar and stepping into the unknown, but there was no turning back. We were survivors, bound together by tragedy and the fragile thread of hope that this map represented. We would face whatever lay ahead. Together, we had to. The first step out of the auditorium, into the blinding sunlight that streamed through a gaping hole in the wall, felt like a crossing over, a farewell to the world we once knew. We were no longer the carefree students we had been just days ago. We were explorers, navigating a treacherous new landscape, our resolve tempered by fear. The map rustled in the breeze, its strange symbols beckoning us forward. We exchanged glances, a silent acknowledgement of the uncertain path ahead. And then with a collective breath we moved, our footsteps echoing in the silence of the ruined hallway, our eyes fixed on the unknown horizon.